千里之行，始于足下. A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we delve deeply into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. Let's take a quick look at what we talked about last time. As I mentioned, we're ready to go into the paraphrase and full circle for chapter 46. Last time, we were able to complete our discussion of the entire chapter, line by line. We started, of course, with our usual sectional analysis. We identified 3 sections, 4 lines, 3 lines, and 2 lines. We also hit a couple of key concepts, important key concepts last time. Let's take a quick look at them in our recap. So first, we started with the idea of having and not having the Tao. We applied that to the world, past and present. As we have learned in this chapter, in ancient China, sometimes the land of China had the Tao and sometimes not. So by the way, does anyone know how long Chinese history is overall? So the answer varies, depends on who you ask. If you ask the Chinese people themselves, they are likely to say 5,000 years. 5,000 years total. So the year is now, of course, 2020, which means before the 2,000 most recent years, the 2 millennia, there were another 3,000 years before that of ancient Chinese history. And usually it's rounded up when you ask the Chinese people because they include the very earliest stage before the invention of language, the written language, the invention of writing, and the recording of historical events. So work with the overall length of 5,000 years and the approximate time of Lao Tzu 2,500 years ago, and you can see that Lao Tzu is roughly at the halfway point between the very beginning, the very dawn of ancient Chinese civilization and today. So at the halfway point, historically, for him, when he wrote these lines, there were already numerous times in the history that he knew where China had the Tao and times when it didn't. So that change from having the Tao to not having the Tao, from the Tao being well known to being unknown or cast aside, ignored, that transition took place many more times since the time of Lao Tzu. So it's been that way, going back and forth. Today, as I think you can probably guess, because of all the tumultuous and chaotic events in the world, the situation is no different, and today is not one of those times historically when there's the Tao, when the Tao has a strong presence over there. Of course, the same can be said for all over the world, East and West. This is why I oftentimes will emphasize that if you are seeking the Tao, you are much, much better off not trying to find it over there, traveling far away. You're much, much better off staying put exactly where you are, here in the West, and focus on strengthening the Tao right here. This is actually the best chance that the entire world has of making that happen. Surprising? Perhaps, but true. In fact, this entire idea is reinforced in the next chapter we're going to get into, chapter 47. So kind of a sneak preview there. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're getting together to cultivate, create, and strengthen the Tao right here and right now. So last time, to continue with our recap, some of the key concepts that we talked about included contentment and discontent. They are sort of the yin and yang, where discontent might be the yin side of the equation, and contentment might be the yang. Or you can also flip it around. That yin was the yin could be seen as insufficiency, which is discontent. Yang could be contentment, which is to be full, to be overfilling. But then you can also look at it the other way in terms of the actions that discontent and contentment would inspire. So when you feel a lack, yin, you are motivated to take action to resolve that. That action is yang, so yin leading to yang. When you are content, you can rest easy, knowing you have enough. The resting part, as opposed to action, would be the yin, the inactive. So they lead back and forth between one and the other. Here in the slide that we went through last time, we talked about 知足, to know sufficiency. And what we did was that I shared a story with everyone about a conversation between Confucius and his disciple, Yan Hui. So in that story, toward the very end, Confucius said that there was a saying that he knew, there was an expression that he knew that he had been contemplating. So it makes more sense when you realize that Confucius was roughly at the time of Lao Tzu, so roughly 2,500 years ago. He was the younger man. He was younger than Lao Tzu. And the Chinese people themselves believe that he was a disciple of Lao Tzu, and there are movie depictions about that. So just like Lao Tzu, he also occupied this historical halfway point between the origin of ancient Chinese dawn of civilization and today. So in his position, halfway between the very distant past and present day, he would also have plenty of ancient teachings that were ancient to him, sayings and expressions that were ancient to him as he is to us. Now, his sayings, of course, in the West, we have the quote-unquote Confucius says. Most of the quotes that you see online attributed to Confucius are in fact made up by meme makers, by people who came up with a wise saying and then decided to attribute it to Confucius. If you were to ever delve into the writing about Confucius and by Confucius students, you would quickly know the way that his mind worked. You would quickly understand his personality, the way he spoke, the flavor of an actual Confucius saying. When you get to know that, it is quite easy to look at these quotes on the internet about what Confucius has said and be able to recognize that it's actually a misquote. But in this case, this was a story written by Zhuangzi about Confucius and his students, and toward the very end, Confucius said this expression to Yan Hui: 知足者不以利自累也. 审自得者，失之而不惧。行修于内者，无畏而不作。He said that this was a great saying for him, something that he had been contemplating, and having spoken with his students, Yan Hui, now he realized what it really meant. And the translation, as you see below, is actually one of my favorites because it's deep in explaining the world. It's so insightful in explaining how the world actually works and the behavior of the people that we probably all know, the good and the bad. Those who know contentment will not exhaust themselves by pursuing greed. So those who cultivate the Tao would definitely not shy away from gaining materially as well as spiritually when they are able to do so in a Tao-centric way. There's no problem with that. And yet, in pursuing greed, they wouldn't bother exhausting themselves in that particular pursuit because that would not be Tao-centric. And the second line says, those who are self-sufficient will not fear the loss of material things. I find this illuminating because I find that the people who have actually done it, who have attained the degree of success in accordance with the Tao, they have no fear. It is okay with them if they were to lose everything because they know they have the ability to gain it all back. It doesn't matter to them, the Tao is within them. With the Tao, they have everything. So that's another reason why these are my favorite lines. And then the final line, those who cultivate internally will not feel ashamed for the lack of position. So to me, this was a revelation as well, because in society, we're used to seeing people who look up or look down or regard themselves with varying levels of self-respect, maybe too much, maybe too little, or somewhere in between. What this is saying is that if you understand yourself, if you possess authentic self-knowledge, then you know exactly what your life is about. You know where you're going in life. So whatever position you happen to occupy on your way to your destination, it doesn't really matter. It's not as big a deal as it may be for a whole bunch of other people. Whole bunch of people that we see every day for whom it matters very much what position in society they occupy. And they too will exhaust themselves, not just for greed, but also to climb the social ladder, to get into a higher position, to get ahead of other people. Absolutely exhausting. So just like Confucius in the story written by Zhuangzi, I like to reflect on these three lines for myself and make sure that I am among the Tao cultivators who really know contentment, who really are self-sufficient, who really have that internal orientation and focus in my cultivation. So I wanted to bring this up again. I think it is so great that it deserves another few minutes of our time. And then the final big concept that we talked about is the very last line where it talks about lasting satisfaction, 长足. And I used another story about a young man and the sage to illustrate that. So the details are in the recording that is being uploaded to YouTube. And the gist of the story was that the young man was not a happy camper because he focused on what he was lacking. The sage pointed out for him that he already possessed great wealth. in terms of his health, his life, the years still ahead of him. Then I also wanted to point out for everyone that it wasn't just Tao Te Ching chapter 46 that focused on contentment and being discontent. It was in the previous chapters as well. Overall, out of the entire Tao Te Ching, there are 3 chapters that touched on 知足. And chapter 33, as you can see in my table here, is about knowing contentment being the real meaning of wealth. At every level of asset ownership, every level of material assets, material resources acquisition. And then chapter 44, knowing contentment avoids disgrace, because those who are discontent are basically knocking themselves out, causing a lot of problems for themselves and other people in the pursuit of greed and fame. Disgraceful. So to know contentment would be the opposite of that. It would be the ability to live a smooth, effortless, graceful life. Then finally, in this chapter that we're about to conclude, chapter 46, it talks about there's no disaster greater than discontent. It's the ultimate disaster. Reason being, it's a bottomless pit. It's something that's like a black hole, sucking everything, all the energy, all the oxygen from your life. And finally, the last line that refers to it, the satisfaction of contentment is the lasting satisfaction. So that is the most important thing. The lasting satisfaction, the constant contentment. So these are the concepts that we touched on last time. I'm happy to have a chance to do a quick recap. Now, let's get into the paraphrase of Tao Te Ching 46. Our purpose, as ever, is to demonstrate understanding by expressing the original using modern vernacular. As we talked about at the beginning of our meeting today, we have identified 3 sections. So we will do the paraphrase one section at a time. The first section, among my favorites in the Tao Te Ching, uses the imagery of horses in battle, in war, times of warfare, the misery of war versus the happy, peaceful productivity of peacetime existence, peacetime harmony. So this is the paraphrase that I want to offer for the first section. When the world understands the Tao, a positive and productive peace prevails among nations and in our lives. There is no need for conflict, so swords are beaten into plowshares and fast horses are used for farming instead of military service. When we fail to understand the Tao, conflict and chaos prevail among nations. There is endless warfare, so mayors are pressed into service, and if they become pregnant, they have no choice but to give birth on the battlefield. To me, that's very powerful, a powerful reminder of why war is hell. Then we proceed to the second section. This is all about the ultimate crime, ultimate disaster, the ultimate fault. And they all have to do with discontent as the source of greed, source of avarice. And here is the paraphrase I want to offer for that. What causes such a crime against all people, such a disaster for the world, such a fault against humanity? It is nothing less than a delusional desire that can never be satisfied, the lack of contentment like a bottomless pit, and the grasping hand of greed. And then lastly, let's bring it home to a conclusion. Last 2 lines talk about the lasting contentment, the true satisfaction when you follow the Tao. So here is the paraphrase I want to offer for that. There is only one solution, and that is the fulfillment of the Tao. Only the true path can take us to the state of constant contentment. That is our goal. The quest for the Tao is the quest for lasting peace. I think easier said than done, right? But that is what this chapter is all about. Now, one final piece to talk about for Tao Te Ching 46, and that is the full circle. How do we connect the end of this chapter back to its beginning to really get the essence of the Tao? This is something that can be done with every chapter of the Tao Te Ching. Now we're going to do it for 46. So in the last lines of Tao Te Ching 46, what's going on there? Well, Lao Tzu talks about 常足. That is the lasting satisfaction, the constant state of joy in knowing that you have everything you need. Here it is. Now, what we want to do is that we want to connect it to the beginning of the chapter. Then, here's the beginning. It says, when the world has the Tao. The last two characters there, 有道. That is the key, having the Tao. What does it really mean? Well, we can connect it with 常足 to see what it actually means. Let's link it up. So what it says, when we connect the dots like this, is that when you have the Tao, you can have lasting satisfaction or constant contentment. The other way works as well, which is when you have constant contentment, that's when you have the Tao. So it's kind of a two-way street. And we can use this in our lives for greater understanding and greater application of the Tao. So let's go ahead and apply it. Let's go ahead and apply it to life, apply it to ourselves. So how can you tell if the Tao is present in your life? Is the presence of the Tao strong and powerful in your life? Or is it barely there? Or is it somewhere in between? Or is it sometimes there and sometimes not? How do we tell? Now we can see that 常足 would be one way to tell. Now remember, when we say having the Tao, what we mean is having a usable, practical understanding of the Tao, one that can be applied to life that results in peace and harmony. So let me say that again. 有道, having the Tao, means having a working knowledge of the Tao, one that produces positive results like peace and harmony. So let's continue. How do we assess that? Well, we can ask a bunch of questions to check the state of contentment in life. And we can do that both by observing other people and by observing ourselves. Let me give you some examples. Are you constantly hoping for a windfall? What do I mean by that? By windfall, I mean sudden good fortune, like the fantasy of suddenly winning at gambling, as an example. Gambling, I'm using the term in a generic sense. I don't just mean going to a casino. I am talking about gambling in all different forms, all different manifestations. It could even be betting on games like sports. A lot of people do that. It could even be betting on stocks. Some people, investing in short-term stocks may say that, oh, I have the inside scoop on this particular company. I know they're about to go public with the latest advance in a particular technology, their stocks are going to go sky high, so I'm going to buy right now while the buying is still good because I'm expecting it's going to double or triple in value, etc. That's actually a form of gambling. Even to the people who feel like they have the inside track. And something as seemingly harmless as lottery tickets, well, that's gambling too. And the fantasy of suddenly getting notification that you have inherited a lot of money or properties, well, that's also windfall, sudden good fortune. So do you entertain that fantasy? Maybe sometimes. And do you find yourself lusting after the greatest, the latest and greatest? And again, I'm using that term in the most general sense possible. The latest and greatest what? Well, it could be anything. It could be fashion trends, the latest fad, jumping on the bandwagon for a particular thing. It could be the latest and greatest technology gadgets, lining up around the block, waiting for the store to open so you can buy that latest and greatest. These are all manifestations of discontent. They are all characterized by easy come, easy go. So for instance, buying the latest and greatest gadgets may produce satisfaction, but it's temporary. It's transient. Soon enough, the latest and greatest shift to yet another new revision of technology. There's a new latest and greatest. The satisfaction that you had in buying the latest and greatest, well, that faded pretty quickly. It's the same thing in winning sudden fortune, which is why the vast majority of the people who experience that, a windfall, well, mismanage, lose that windfall, and some of them become broke. So this is one way to tell. If, hopefully, you are not in that state of discontentment, you, hopefully, have attained the state of constant contentment or lasting satisfaction, 长足. So what is it exactly? I want to explain it as clearly as I possibly can. I want to make sure everyone knows that when we talk about 长足, it is not the kind of satisfaction that leads to inaction and stagnation. It is the basis for proactive motivation. It's the basis for positive and cheerful mindset as you plan your next move. So let me connect the beginning of this chapter to the end to form that full circle. And then I want to bring in for you a working definition of 长足. 长足 is a state of constant happiness with everything that you can use as a foundation for improving your life. The last part is actually quite important. It's a state of constant happiness that you can use as a foundation for improving your life, not something that you can use as an excuse to do nothing. So as I mentioned, proactive motivation, a basis for a positive and cheerful mindset as you plan your next move. As I was putting this together, a mental image comes to mind that may seem very far away from the Tao. Except that, of course, when you come right down to it, there's the Tao in everything. So what is this mental image that came into my mind? Well, it's actually Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Can anyone venture to guess why I would think about Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs when it comes to 长足? Well, specifically, I was recalling to mind the song Whistle While You Work from that movie. Hopefully, you have seen the Disney version of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, so you know what I'm talking about. Whistle While You Work depicts that cheerful mindset as you work on the next thing, as you engage in the work that has to be done. Happily, cheerfully, positive mindset. Whistle while you work was when Snow White was doing household chores, being helped by a whole bunch of animals. That's a very charming scene. There's also the song Hi Ho from the Seven Dwarfs themselves, that after a long day working at the diamond mines, their own diamond mines, they are happy, cheerful, and they are going home for a well-deserved rest. So that also depicts this very cheerful mentality, very proactive as you work on something that needs to be done, not an excuse for inaction. So that is, in a nutshell, what Cangzu is all about. Let me say one last thing before we move on to summarize this entire chapter. We talk about knowing that you have enough. How do you tie that together with happily going to work? Well, Cangzu means that you've got everything you need to do a great job. In the next slide, we'll talk about having everything. And indeed, that is true right now, regardless of your goals and objectives. I'm here to tell you, you've got everything you need to do a great job. And there is a joy in using those tools that you need to do the great job. All right. Let's bring everything to a complete conclusion. This is the summary that you saw from our last meeting. It is very apropos, very appropriate here. You've got everything you need to do a great job. And when you realize that, you go from 不知足. 不知足 means discontent. You go from that and you transform yourself to 常足. The constant contentment, the lasting satisfaction. And the realization, as you heard me say last time at the end of our meeting, is knowing that you've got your family. And I don't mean the family you were born into, but the family that you have the ability to create around you. And you have your friends, not just the friends you already possess, but the friendship that you can create and build, the connections that are waiting for you to make. You have your mind. You have your mind to observe, contemplate, understand the different things. How cool is that? You have the Tao. So remember, 常足, constant joy, comes from your realization of all of these and more, everything you already possess. And this concludes our discussion of 46. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.